Welcome to Next Economy Now. I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy. Lift is an impact consulting firm whose mission is to create, model, and share a locally self-reliant economy that works for the benefit of all life. The goal of this podcast is to highlight the leaders who are using a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, diverse, transparent, and whole systems approach to using business as a force for good. Our guest today is Tiffany Jana, co-founder and CEO at TMI Consulting, a certified B Corp, which is based in Richmond, Virginia. Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Really glad to be here.
What is the origin of TMI Consulting?
So I actually followed my mother into the diversity consulting world. I watched her start some offices of multicultural affairs in some universities, and she was doing demographic research and things like that. So when it was time for me to go out and find my way, I really was looking to find a great work-life balance as a single mother. I was a single mother of two at the time that I started the company 13 years ago. So I wanted a work-life flexibility, and I wanted to sort of make a difference in the world. Mom had already built this company that had some traction behind it. So I started working with her more in earnest and less kind of as an intern who happens to live with you. And then I just spun off on my own because she's 3 hours north of me. She's in Maryland, and I'm in Richmond, Virginia. So I spun the business off, and it's been successful.
Yeah, I heard things are doing well. You have a book, commercially published book coming out. Can you tell folks about that?
Yes, the book is called Overcoming Bias, Building Authentic Relationships Across Difference. And it sounds exactly what it sounds like. It's about the biases that we have and how do we move beyond them? How do we become aware of them and actually interrupt some of those messages that can get in the way of everything from, relationships to hiring decisions to, where we spend our money, where we put our children to school. So pretty excited about that.
Great. And I love, you have this great TED Talk. What's the name of the TED Talk again, just so I can say that to the folks?
It's The Power of Privilege.
The Power of Privilege. So for those listeners, it's amazing. And I really love the way, Tiffany, that you make people feel comfortable, or at least as comfortable as possible, talking about diversity and inclusion. You say things like, this topic is a little uncomfortable and that's okay. Or, or diversity is not a dirty word. Or, the social responsible business movement only has a diversity challenge because the world has a diversity challenge. And so I'm wondering, how is language around the issues of diversity and inclusion informed your work?
It's actually, I think language has informed it less than generation has. So the choice of language really is a choice. And I think that's what I've been working on building and redefining and refining, pulling bits and pieces from hither and thither, because what we have found as the two co-founders of this iteration of the company, myself and Matthew Freeman, we are Generation X. So we did not live through the civil rights movement. And many of the practitioners who came before us and who are still out there are civil rights survivors. And I say survivors quite deliberately. They went through some really gnarly stuff. And as a result, what has happened over the decades is that people hear diversity and inclusion is coming, and they, cringe because some folks have had some negative experiences hearing from and learning from people who were angry, and rightfully so, because they went through some really awful stuff. So Matthew and I didn't have those experiences. We weren't there. We respect that that's from whence this work came. But what we do with our language is we try to use it in service of an aspirational approach to diversity and inclusion. So traditional diversity and inclusion has a deficit-based approach. They're looking for what is wrong. They're going to tell you what is wrong. And oftentimes it's pointing the finger, it's shame and blame, and we're going to fix you because you're broken. And I've tried to flip that on its head. So the use of language is very deliberate and powerful in that context. And that's the origin of the name TMI. So we're legally incorporated as TMI Consulting Incorporated. TMI stands for nothing, actually, but I'm Tiffany, he's Matthew. We knew we would incorporate. I think it was a partnership when we first started, but we do get paid to have the conversations that, we're taught not to have in polite society, that nobody wants to talk about, and we do them in a way that's both fun and informative.
Yeah, and I love the way you talk, specifically in a TED Talk, you were talking about pretending like we don't see color, which is actually a disservice. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of acknowledging even inherent biases and inherent differences between people?
Yes. So even if I think people's intention when they say they don't see color, this whole notion of colorblind in terms of people comes from a good place. What people intend to communicate is your color is not an impediment to our relationship. It's not going to alter the way that I see you or treat you based on, some other societal stereotype or whatever, which is in and of itself all well and good. Okay. The challenge that happens is that I will just take my own, my own diversity. And so the two I'll name off the top are African American and female. So as an African American female or woman of color, I have moved through the world as a woman of color from the day I was born, probably until the day I die, but definitely until now I'm still a woman of color. And those identities have shaped the very person who I am. Had I moved through the world as, an Asian man, I might see the world differently. So when you say to me, you don't see color and you don't, that part of me is not what you're saying. You're essentially not acknowledging that and it's not important. Well, I appreciate that you're not going to let it adversely affect how you interact with me, but I don't appreciate the downplaying of things that are very important to my identity. The fact that I'm a female CEO in Richmond, Virginia is a pretty big deal. The fact that I'm a Black female CEO in Richmond, Virginia is an even bigger deal. Statistically, I'm a rare bird. And that is, that lends itself to all kinds of very important things when I talk about inspiring the next generation and looking at, young folks being able to look out into the world and see themselves reflected in all kinds of different occupations and places of influence. So when you don't see that and you don't acknowledge that at one point in my life, I was on food stamps and that matters, and that both of my parents are doctors, and that still happened to me. That matters. And that, I have been pulled over for absolutely no reason many times, and I've learned how to drive a fancy car because I'm less likely to get pulled over. These are experiences they may have absolutely nothing to do with race, but then again, maybe they do. So acting like they're not there is difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah. And I must say, I really thank you and admire your honesty and transparency around this issue. And you do such an amazing job of framing it in a way that builds a coalition. I think one of the biggest threats, at least in the B Corp / socially responsible business movement, is that we have intellectually aligned and sympathetic white business leaders that don't actually act to move against discrimination. How can we, in this, trying to build a new sector of the economy, how can we really hold those differences and that space, but also act on it? I think that's the key.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it's important to understand that diversity for its own sake is not. It's like why is it that we want to be inclusive? Why is it that we're looking for the diversity? So the biggest thing that I see in terms of challenges and obstacles to reaching diversity goals or being more inclusive as people and as companies and as leaders is that people usually aren't organized around anything specific. It's a lot of sort of general, just good, like you said, just good feelings from people who want to do the right thing and sort of want to see themselves being in a good space, but not necessarily knowing why. So we need to be very clear about why we want to hold these values up. Why do we want to make our companies look any different, be any different. So if it's, if innovation is the thing, then that's great. If it's, you want to reflect the businesses or the communities that you serve, that's a perfectly fine thing. If it really is about social justice, which is where a lot of this ideology comes from, then that's fine. But it can't be nebulous. People need to be very specific about why it is that this matters to them, because that's one of the failures. The diversity industry has failed to define in a uniform way what diversity is, and there is no panacea. There's no one size fits all. So the answer to how to hold these things in tension, how to solve the problem, is different because it's contextual, and diversity itself is contextual. Matthew Freeman is a white male at my company, and he actually brings an element of diversity in as much as I think he's the only full-time white male here, where if I take the same conversation out to Silicon Valley, that's probably not going to be the case.
Right.
So being very clear about what it is that you need, why you need it, and how your organization or system is going to benefit from that is really important. And it's interesting because there's we like to define diversity as the ways that we are both similar and different. And those, the big protected classes, Title VII stuff gets all of the attention. Meanwhile, things like cognitive diversity and work style differences kind of get thrown by the wayside. But it's really important to know that all of those elements of diversity are really important, and that there's just a very high statistical likelihood that you're going to get all the different kinds of diversity if you actually do focus on some of the Title VII stuff. So we want to expand that definition so that it makes it easier for people to see themselves reflected in the diversity. But you also don't want to lose sight that, if you happen to have, an African-American woman in an environment that doesn't have very many of those, she's going to probably bring a different perspective, most likely.
Right. So let's apply that to your work and the process you take people through. So do you work with, if you're working with a company, do you first help people identify their own biases before applying that knowledge to the context of business? Or what's kind of the framework that you've found to be effective in talking to businesses about this?
Oh, yeah. So we don't start in on the individual, because it's, you don't want to get people on the defensive feeling like this is all very personal, because the work that we do it's organizational development and then civic engagement. So we really are focused on the system. Now we know that does ultimately come down to the individual, but what we do is we lead from data. So this industry historically has led from intuition. People just, walk in and there will be some precipitating factor, or somebody wants to be compliant or check a box. It doesn't matter what it is. Usually a diversity trainer would come in, do some diversity training, and leave. What we do is we actually provide a longitudinally field-tested and validated mixed method organizational assessment. So we do focus groups, we do interviews, we get a whole bunch of qualitative data that allows us to populate a quantitative survey so that we are asking the right questions and make sure that we're asking questions that are pertinent to the organization. And then we deliver a qualitative survey using audience response technology, actually, so that we make it even more anonymous than an email survey, because it's clickers, wireless handheld voting devices in people's hands. And then we compare the data between the quantitative and the qualitative, and if they line up pretty well, then we can proceed from there. If we have any additional questions, we do more qualitative research. And then we're able to report back to the leadership. When we do these surveys, because we do them live and they're more anonymous than a paper or an email survey will ever be, we get over 80-90% participation every time. So it's very confidence-inducing for the organization when I say, hey, 95% of your organization says the following things. We paint this picture of the organization, and we're able to pinpoint whether or not you've got a problematic leader in a couple of divisions making people uncomfortable, or whether or not you have an organization that's been optimized for bad behavior. The two strategies and interventions for those scenarios are very, very different, with huge resource, allocation implications. So we're able to be much more precise and much more deliberate with our strategies, which is one of the things that really sets us apart. But once we're able to do that, then we can look at, do we need training? Do we need coaching? Do we need accountability? What does that roadmap look like? And if people have the internal capacity with training and development to deal with it themselves, they can take the recommendations, they can go and do it themselves, and we can come back in a year and redeploy the survey and see what's moved. Or if they don't, or they want a third party to handle it, we can take care of that for them and then still deploy another survey in a year or year over year and see what we've done and hold ourselves accountable, which is kind of awesome.
And in your engagements, what have you found? What are the characteristics of companies that succeed in the process you've outlined versus the companies that sort of hire, not necessarily you, but hire a diversity trainer and nothing really changes? So what are some of the key things that happen in that period of time?
That's a great question. That's where the rubber meets the road. So the first thing is leadership has to be bought in, like seriously, truly, earnestly bought in. It's really easy for me to get a client who, once they've lost a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, so they mess up in some Title VII area, somebody sues, they lose all the money, the leadership becomes highly incentivized to do something about it. That does not ever have to happen necessarily. You can invest in the human talent ahead of time. The skills and tools required to prevent that kind of stuff from happening and going very badly are just that. They're skills and tools. They're things that we can teach, we can address. So if you get leadership that's bought in from the beginning and are really willing to do the work and show up to the things that they need to show up to and be as accountable as everybody else, that's the first indicator. When you don't have leadership that's bought in, that is the best indicator that it will indeed fail. And then beyond that, the size and age, relative size and age of an organization are going to impact how much something has been ingrained in a culture. So if we've got an agile startup company that only has 15 people and we've decided, the organizational culture happens one of two ways. It either happens by default or it happens by design. And most of us as leaders are so busy doing what we do to grow the company that it's happening by default. And people are really funny and things happen. Everything that's problematic and challenging out in the big wide world replicates itself in our tiny little microcosm of an office, of an organization. So if you decide to create a culture by design, then you've got to have some accountability around that. So that 15-person startup, when they decide, hey guys, you know what? I've noticed that we got a couple new people coming on board, and we've gotten ourselves into the habit of telling really inappropriate work jokes, and we should probably do something about that, and a couple other things. It is going to take them so much less time to put into place systems and mechanisms and controls and accountability, and some training to to course correct that situation. An organization, and this is an organization we work with a lot of government organization that's like over 100 years old with several thousand people, that's a much bigger investment. Still worthwhile, but that's multi-years. We're talking about, 5, 6, 7, 8 years worth of work to really get something like that turned around. And it's not impossible. We do it and we've been able to measure it, but it's harder. So staying the course. One of the things that makes people crazy is the commitment from the beginning. We're going to do this, and we're going to do some diversity. One day diversity training doesn't work. So, if anybody's listening to this and they just want me to come in for one day, I can't fix anything in a day. But what we can do is help people devise a strategy. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What are your strengths? What are your opportunities? And then get in there and really create a plan and do something. So, if people don't commit and they just jump ship, that leaves employees with a sense of disillusionment, because it's, do you really care about us and our interests and how we're feeling in the workplace, or, did you just want to look like you were doing that?
Right. And something I've been toying with in my mind is, I think it's actually more well-known, but it seems like we only have about 3 room in our heads for 3 priorities at any given time. And it seems like diversity, if a company is going to double down to it, really needs to be a top 3 priority. Have you found that to be true in your experience?
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think that I would have to say that the ones, particularly when I think about, the larger agencies, a smaller organization could probably get away with having it be a little bit lower because the time commitment from initial sort of assessment to actually getting through some kind of first level planning and first level wins essentially is shorter. But yes, I think for an organization that has that has gotten itself to a size or a stage that is a little bit more stable, you're probably right. It needs to be really. I mean, it has to be a strong commitment, but top three is probably about right. Yeah, the people who have been the most successful and sort of easiest to work with are the ones who have made it abundantly clear to their direct reports and their staff that this is an urgent issue that will be prioritized.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that in that context, but that's really well put.
Why, thank you, Tiffany.
You have a way with words. What, did you write a book?
One thing that's sort of along the lines of the uncomfortable feeling that you so eloquently allowed me to feel around this issue is, the evolving definition of diversity has been somewhat confusing to me. For example, when I think about diversity at a business, it's like what comes up for me is I want to see women and people of color as being representative of that diversity. Like if someone says, I want to have a board of directors with diversity, it's like, I want to see an African-American female or several on the board. But it seems like people are expanding diversity into like educational background or things that maybe they can sort of say we're diverse, but it's just differences that are slighter, they're smaller without being diverse. Do you find that that's...
Oh, you're a smart man. All right, so here's where your podcast wins and pulls the kind of lifts the veil. So what we call that, and I don't think I have a concept for it, a name for it, but it's a phenomenon that it's all about making the diversity itself more palatable. So I used to actually call it the diversity sushi roll. So it's, you take the real core diversity stuff, the Title VII stuff, the social equity and all that is in the middle, and you wrap it up in delicious rice, and rice paper, right? Or seaweed. Yes. And it's just a matter of making it more palatable because people do still have negative associations. People see it as a zero-sum game. Well, if they make a diversity hire, then that person's probably going to get diversity promoted too, and then I won't be able to get a promotion. And we shouldn't see it that way. But unfortunately, we're left with these awkward legacies. So I believe that multifaceted, multi-layered diversity is real. It's true. But it's an easier way into the conversation for people who are otherwise terrified of addressing it head on. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just like there's nothing wrong with me taking an aspirational approach to diversity and inclusion as long as I'm not willing to discount the fact that the Title VII exists for a reason, as long as I'm not willing to forget that civil rights happened and that there are traditionally and historically marginalized groups that sometimes people have to, put their finger on the scale, is an expression that I like, in order to make sure that folks have opportunities. So it's a really difficult thing, but there's always every 5 or so years, there's a new or a repackaged concept that people can say that they're doing something with diversity without having to feel the pangs of guilt for looking straight down the barrel of, oh my gosh, Black people were enslaved once upon a time and women couldn't vote.
Right.
And that's, at one point it was unconscious bias was getting a lot of traction. I think it's still kind of lingering around. It's easy to talk about unconscious bias because it's not my fault. I'm not aware of it. That's why it's called unconscious. So we can talk about that.
Right.
So I don't really see a problem with it inherently as long as it is a lead in to the harder conversation. If it stops there and we say, look, we all went to different Ivy League colleges, so we're totally diverse. then you have a problem.
Right. Like, I don't want it to be 8 white men on a board of directors saying, well, I'm from California and I'm from Texas. And like, that's, to me, that's not diversity.
No, and the other problem that's it's the, kind of the flip side of that is, like a lot of people want folks like me to be on their boards of directors. When I pick up the phone now, people know who I am. It's kind of nice, but I spent the better part of my life with people having a conversation with me, and then when they go to meet with me, they walk right past me because they're waiting for the white lady. So I sound like a lot of majority people. I basically grew up like a middle class white person, and what's happened is that the overlap between my experiences, my musical tastes, schools I attended, things like that, are so parallel with a lot of white folks that I'm very comfortable to be around. So I can actually be in a room with people who look nothing like me but think just like me. And so that's one to be careful of if you are a leader and you're looking to create some authentic diversity. And this is why you really need to know, why do you want it? Why does this matter to you? Because it's like, if you're in any kind of product innovation, if you are building, making, purchasing, distributing anything out into the wider world, and you have customers that rely on you being creative and innovative, you really, really need to have all different kinds of people with different ways of thinking. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes race and experience and background will cause a heavy overlap with those things. But you need to really screen for the things that create groupthink, because same questions, same responses, same solutions, when you have the same kind of people answering them over and over again. So yeah, you can have a picture that looks like the United Nations, but if these are all, type A people who think just alike, then the diversity is not serving you. How is diversity serving you is a question that people should be able to answer.
That's a great question. How is diversity serving you? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I would actually put it as one of the like hallmarks of success, and that I like to look for in a program. Any given leader in an organization should be able to, if asked that question, how is diversity serving you, they should be able to point anywhere in the organization and name it. And they shouldn't have to point at Taco Tuesday. They shouldn't say there's that one program that we do, once a quarter, and it's fantastic. No.
Yeah.
You should be able to talk about, groups of people who get together on a regular basis and, ideate or whatever it is that you do, and really name specifically not only how it's serving you, but also how you got there.
Right. Do you find one thing that's sort of an odd similarity in the socially responsible business movement is sometimes some people feel that the expectation for a company to be socially responsible is you have to come from a pure intention that this is the right thing. And then some people feel like, oh, I'm going to be socially responsible because it's maybe like better for my business bottom line. Do you feel that is there a purity coming at diversity? Do you feel like if someone comes in at a certain level that it's more correct to sort of come at diversity from a pure level, or maybe it's like a business competitive level and they don't quite understand diversity on a deep level? Do you find that matters to the outcomes?
To the outcome. Oh, yeah, that was interesting. I was like, where's this question going?
Yeah.
Because the two co-founders of this company would answer that question differently. I'm a business person at the end of the day. I just happen to look like a lot of people's picture of diversity. Matthew Freeman really has spent more years explicitly working on things like race and inclusion and civic engagement. I just have lived as a minority more of my entire life. I have to start by saying that my preferred clients, my favorite clients, are the people who, they don't need to be well versed, they don't need to be super fluent, they just need to really actually care. The client that is like I always say we turn down an average of about $500,000 a year in clients that are not ready because there's just not an air of genuine empathy and concern for the well-being of their employees. So that's my first sort of litmus test. Like, how much does the culture of this organization or the leadership or at least the person who's sitting across from me really genuinely care about how included people feel? That's the first piece. Beyond that, I do think, and I have to say that because even if they're sort of they don't know what they don't know, I can teach that. Like our training, we're good stock and trade. We're really good at that. So I can help you understand why this is important. Like, I don't think that people who are racist or sexist or homophobic are that way because they're horrible people. They're that way because they don't have exposure to people. They don't know any better. They haven't gotten out enough. They don't have all of the information. So they're working from a partial picture. So we can work on what it is they need to know, but it's, empathy is a harder thing to teach. The human connection, that's a little harder to teach. So,
right.
But I would say that the commitment part, it is going to be more successful if people are committed. And like a weird example of it is nonprofit is our natural market. Like in the first couple of years of this iteration of the business, that was all of our clients were nonprofit initially because they are already doing the social justice and they're pure in their business form, as it were. They're mission driven. But I wouldn't always say that they were the most successful at meeting those goals, and they came from sort of a pure place. So, yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer. That's probably about the best I can do at this hour of the day.
That's a great answer.
Did you get enough information there? Because and I don't have I'm a businesswoman and I'm in the for-profit world. It's B Corp, but I mean B Corp works for me because diversity and inclusion would make sense as a nonprofit. But I love the economics driven model. This is fantastic. And I think like my co-founder came from nonprofit universe, and I had to drag him into this kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
He was not. I mean, he understands now. Most people work for companies that are for-profit or government, and they deserve to have an awesome, inclusive workplace too. But he spends more of his time in the civic engagement space, which is much easier for him to get his head around.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about B Corps? How did you first hear about it, and how is it? What was the process like? And do your clients know or care that you're a B Corp?
Oh yeah. So no, we were a Virginia partnership at the time, and I don't know what it was that made me. I woke up and decided I wanted to start thinking about the structure of the business in a different way. I don't know why, and I saw that an organization, C3 Creative Change Center, something that came out of the Richard Florida model. It was how we used to be on their first board, but they were having a lunch and learn deal, and it was all about structuring your business. An attorney was leading it up, and he talked about S corps and C corps and LLCs, and at the very end, he's like, just threw this thing out and said, and there's this new thing in Virginia, and it's called a benefit corporation, and it's basically, if your business is like a do-gooder business or something, then you can have this other structure, and it's pretty cool. If you have any questions, here's a piece of paper. I'm like, what is that?
That's the worst endorsement ever.
I know. I mean, it was. I kid you not. I spent all the time on everything else, and this one got the least. It was kind of a throwaway. But he did, and I don't think it was because he didn't think it had any value. It was just because it was new, and he didn't have that much to say about it. So I grabbed that piece of paper, had a short conversation with him, and I was like, this is it. This is me. This is exactly who we need to be. So I think that was one of those moments where, there are times when I take majority shareholder and executive privilege and just make decisions. Because my job, I spend 80% of my time working on the business, and the other co-founder spends 80% of his time working in the business. And so this is strictly my terrain. And I'm like, we're doing this. So it was completely worthwhile. Immediately started to shape the way I grew the business because it forced me to think about things that I wouldn't have thought about for years to come. And I didn't realize at the onset that I didn't have to become a Virginia benefit corporation in order to get decertified. I thought I had to do both, so I did, which I'm really glad about because now I'm best in class with both of those designations. And it has been amazing. Our clients already love what we do. A lot of people do expect us to be a nonprofit because we do diversity and inclusion work. But because of the way that we've innovated in our field and innovated in the space, people are not surprised that we are consultants, and we've been able to make the value proposition pretty strong. So when people realize that, and we're even priced competitively compared to other consultants in general. We're not trying to hurt people. It's a really good investment, but we're not killing people, and we do offer competitive rates for our B Corp partners and for nonprofits as well. So it's really nice. But they love it. Our clients think that it's fantastic that we are measuring more than just the bottom line. It makes them feel proud to be associated with us. And I think I might have told you in the book that you wrote, the biggest impact has been the social capital. People know who we are because we're a B Corp in many instances. And the millennial generation is just all over it. Like, we just never stop getting amazingly talented, high potential millennials who are interested in working with us because of the kind of business that we are, because they can see our values clearly stated and they can see that reflected in the work that we do and the way we position ourselves in the world and in the market.
Great. Yeah, it's and full disclosure, Tiffany was featured in my book, The B Corp Handbook, for folks who don't know. Tiffany, I'm interested in the 25, 50, 100-year plan. What do you see for TMI Consulting, and are you optimistic about the way things are heading?
You are hilarious. Nobody has ever asked me for the 100-year plan. 50 is as far as it's ever gone. This is great. What a fantastic day. The Ides of March, I get the 100-year plan. So by 25 years, we should have a TMI research institute. We one of the things that we do well. So companies often have HR departments or HR person, and we are not strictly HR. We've got folks who are HR certified, and we refer to ourselves as HR adjacent. Yeah, there's definitely some overlap, but we don't do compliance and benefits and all that stuff. What we do is we look at the most current research in all things related to what we do, and sometimes it's neuroscience, and sometimes it's straight up diversity, but anything that can be applied to what we do, we take that research and we make it actionable, we make it relevant, and we bring it to people in forms they can take it and use it and learn to be more inclusive. And we really do just do diversity and inclusion. I don't just randomly do your strategic plan, even though I could. We are very specialized. Diversity and inclusion, that's what we do. So in 25 years, I want to do research, original research, because the amount of research that we're using and leveraging and repurposing shows us the gaps in the research, where we're constantly coming up against this needs to be studied. We can see the relationship, but we've got so many clients and got so much going on that we just don't have time to do that ourselves right now. But that is a goal. And then, of course, TMI International, we're already doing work on multiple continents, and it just makes sense. Every country has diversity challenges. The flavors are just a little bit different. And, we've got so many languages and countries represented with our team and our staff and our partners that it just doesn't make sense to not, sort of expand that even further. So 50 years will be all new leadership. And so that will be a whole new set of generational things. By that point, there should be some innovation in terms of innovation and changes in terms of the world becoming a smaller place. So there will be transitions around new elements of diversity. But 100 years is where we need to be gone somewhere between 50 and 100. I don't see this, maybe not gone like the company itself gone, but its purpose should have completely pivoted, because by that time, I'm not one of these people that says, oh, well, the next generation, they just get it. They play in the sandbox together, and you see these kids, they don't see color. That's garbage. Institutional bias is a real thing. Everything that you see playing out on the world stage and playing out on the national stage and playing out in terms of, America is more segregated now than it was in the height of segregation. All of that is by design. We created this America quite on purpose. And the stuff that's been locked at the institutional level is going to continue to pass itself on from generation to generation unless we interrupt those signals and interrupt those systems to such a significant degree that they are no longer perpetuated from generation to generation. But in 100 years, I would fully hope, right, it is my sincere hope, that kids who go to school turn on whatever little magical electrical device they used to learn at that time and read about how we thought once upon a time that the hierarchy of human value was a real thing, that some people had more worth, and that we gave certain people better jobs and more jobs. That should be, and this is not an original thought, I heard this in a keynote from the woman who was the president of the Kellogg Foundation, executive director. She said, when the kids see that they can read that the world was once perceived as flat, and that is as absurd as, wow, we used to think that brown people were less important than white people. That's what we need where we need to be. When race is no longer predictive of outcome, two people get cancer, they look different genders, different races. When their race is absolutely not at all going to predict the outcome of either one of those people's, their pain levels, how well they get treated, and whether or not they die, that's when we're done. So
right.
I would like to be done. And then maybe we're just like, I don't know, selling cookies.
I can definitely tell you're the person who works on the business, because that was an amazingly detailed and incredible response.
Yeah, it matters. Like they don't, the board does not appreciate it when I talk about working myself out of a job. But even with each client, that's what I do. I don't want it to be. I don't want them to be dependent on me forever. Yeah. The idea is get in there, diagnose, make a plan, work the plan, make the plan work, teach them how to work the plan, and measure it, and get out.
And then cookies.
And make cookies. Exactly. Oh,
so, yeah. Last few questions here. Who are you watching? Who is inspiring you currently?
Who is inspiring me currently? Oh, man. Well, I don't have a lot of time to watch a lot of things. So I'm keeping it. I'm have to keep it in the family. I'm still watching my mother. She is still doing the work in this space, and she's a PhD behavioral psychologist, Roman Catholic woman with the biggest heart I've ever seen. And she just turned 65 today. 15th of March is her birthday. I just spent the weekend with her in New York. But I work with her. She works with me. We still contract with each other. And the transformation that I'm able to see her make with people, I mean, she can take the crankiest little old man who, not only doesn't know how to get behind the verse, he doesn't want to, and can work with an individual and just open their minds and open their hearts and just total transformation. The kind that when we can have leaders really see the value of this work, the rest of the work is easy. It's really easy. If we get executive leadership really understanding why this is important, then my job is easy. So she's got some kind of special magic. And so I'm still inspired by her and learning from her continually. And then I have to go the other way because my daughter is 17 and she's the same way. She just won. She won first place in state for forensics, and she did an essay as a prose thing, and then she pulled from Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And my children have never, they don't like checking the box. They have an Irish grandmother. They don't, they're like, we're not black, we're not white, we're just people. And she has decided that what's happening in the world is just so distressing. And she is sort of leaning into, I am an African-American woman and people need to understand that this stuff is real and this stuff matters. And she got unanimously first place, all 9 judges in both of her competitions, and that never happens. And it's incredible to see a 17-year-old, take this on in such a meaningful way. So Yeah, my family is matriarchs.
That's incredible. I was going to say before you mentioned your daughter, I was like, if only your mom could go back to that 16 or 17-year-old self of Tiffany and say, look what you'd be saying about me later in life, how much you love me.
Well, you know what's funny though? I was a total nerd face, and my mother was my best friend always through, like still is, always was. I think there was like a blip in the 20s, but through high school, she was my best friend. Like I had that people made fun of me, and I was like, whatever. We have a great time because she's the smartest person I know. This woman is so beyond brilliant. And, for her to be as intelligent as she is and as still oriented toward the world, she's never been disingenuous about that. It's just, there's work to be done. And she and my daughter actually share a very strong personality type. They're both very similar. I'm the oddball between the two of them. But it's great to be able to look at them and be like, you guys are so cool.
That's amazing. So last thing is, where can we learn more about your work? So maybe the website, and if you wouldn't mind repeating the book title, I'm sure people would love to learn more.
Yeah, so that comes out in October. It's Overcoming Bias, Building Authentic Relationships Across Difference. And I have a real problem with books that point out the problem but don't tell you how to do anything. This book it's all action. It's action, and it's first-person accounts of how people actually overcame their biases, and just, exercises and actions and thought work on how to actually do something about it, not just see it. So there's that. And then, the website's the best thing. I need to write more, but, I'm out here doing the work, building the business. And you can always email me directly if you have a question or anything like that. So I'm Tiffany at TMI Consulting Inc.com, and always happy to have a conversation about this stuff.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Tiffany. I'll don't jump off quite yet. I'll just end the recording, and I just wanted to thank you again for joining on. And for folks who are interested in learning more about these podcasts or any of the work that we do, check out Tiffany's website, TMIconsultinginc.com, or you can check out Lift Economy's website, lifteconomy.com. Thanks for listening.